from the very most obvious perspective, it's going to be more efficient and provide, for some states, cost reductions, right? I mean, you're going to be able to do a lot more in terms of providing services to your constituents, and you'll be able to do it at hopefully a nominal cost to do that. The risks are there too, right? I mean, you can watch and people are always trying to find a science fiction movie that describes the current state that we're in. And it's always some evil corporation called Dynotech or the government that ends up unleashing something. So we have to be careful with how it's being used, that it's being done in a similar way that us as humans would have done it on the government, and that we measure what those outcomes are and that they're not disparate, that they're not off of what we had originally intended.
I think one of the key principles that was laid out in California's report was the risk of open source AI models for government data. So basically using your data to train these models, and that's definitely not worth the risk. And we think that it will probably violate some state laws. So if we approach AI from an enterprise or sandboxed approach, we might limit the ways that government can benefit from AI, but we'll also see the massive amount of data collection that open source AI models are built on.
One of the most important things that we can do is work together, right? So myself and a few other members from other states kind of spun up this AI statewide task force or multi-state task force, so that at a minimum, we can work on some basic definitions, like what is AI, what is data, what do we mean about privacy, what does it mean by completely autonomous decision making. I just don't see something as complicated and fast moving as this as something the federal Congress will do. And with all the privacy concerns and the cybersecurity concerns and the potential risks, we have an obligation to work on it at the state level.
We always say there at NCSL that the states are the laboratories of democracies, and we lead in many areas of policy. Often it's the trend among states that inform Congress if they should act or not, and what shape federal law should take. State government, I mean, not quite as much as local government, but it plays a much more active role in citizens' everyday lives, whether you're talking about public safety or how businesses operate or public benefits programs. So what we've seen with, let's say, the privacy legislation is that the states have been much quicker to act. California was the first or among the first. I think that we have probably 13 or so states that have now passed privacy legislation, and certainly it's spurred conversation in Congress.
Talk about political misinformation and disinformation. We have an obligation to get involved in how that stuff is disclosed, whether that information is accurate, and cause serious damage. So that's obvious. I think second thing, you start thinking about things like critical infrastructure. The government has an obligation to protect its water supply, its roads, its hospitals, its electric grid, and those types of things. So I think we are going to get involved in a big way to measuring and evaluating the risks of where this artificial intelligence is being used and focus on that.
I think in prioritizing what we address with AI regulation, we don't have to reinvent the wheel. So we already have laws regarding civil rights, including discrimination in housing, employment, healthcare, banking. And those laws apply regardless of whether the business or government use an AI tool to make a decision or generate some sort of content. So understanding what we've already prioritized in the past, we can look to the future to see what procedures or interventions need to be added to ensure that these protections are as good or even more effective when we're moving toward the AI world.
With the amount of capital that's being invested in artificial intelligence, the amount of effort and training and whole companies redirecting what they're doing to focus on this isn't going to be Moore's law. This is going to be multiple of that. And a year from now is a long time. There are certain things that we have to require. And let's take, for instance, something about a medical visit. You're going to a doctor, go to a doctor visit. Should it be a completely autonomous system that does that, or should you have someone that's a licensed medical doctor involved? Well, I think 99% of people would say that that's here. So we got to look at things like that, the human in the loop.
I think it's really critical that we know what set of data an AI model an AI model was trained on. And the best example I think that illustrates this is if you are using an AI model for, let's say, a doctor is using one to predict whether somebody's going to have heart disease, and that model was trained on a group of, white suburbanites that's, higher socioeconomic class, the results are not necessarily that going to be the same as in some of our urban settings, maybe with some minority groups that might be facing different challenges.
The liability at the end of the day has to still remain at a human level. Okay, so if a human does something wrong, we have a law against it probably, right? Just because they use a tool that does something wrong shouldn't remove them from that same liability. And so as long as we can keep the context of it's already against the law to discriminate, it's already against the law to pay some people less for doing the same thing. I mean, as long as we go and we treat people fairly and evenly, whether you use this tool or not, we'll be fine. But if you use a tool and you knowingly, you know that it's producing bad outputs, you should be responsible for it the same way you are today.
Certainly, we have had bills that are addressing bias. Personally, for I think to deal with right away, something that we can do right away to address that is looking at transparency. I think that's the most practical policy that we can put into place without delay. And so first, knowing whether you're talking about hiring, knowing whether AI was being used, individuals should be able to know what role AI played in a decision, a hiring decision or some sort of decision.
At the end of the day, if you just think about how much more efficient you are, think about what you can do today that you weren't able to do just 10 years ago, right? You're able to go anywhere you want, buy anything you want. My worry again is how it influences our minds and our behavior. I still want to be able to extol the individual freedom and liberties that we have.
We're so much looking at the negative part with, job loss and bias and all those things. But I think the positive is that AI is going to be able to analyze things much more quickly than humans can, and looking at some of these huge issues like climate change and allowing people to use tools for repetitive tasks and figuring out why certain populations might be dealing with certain health maladies. I think it really is limitless what you can use for AI. It can make our jobs easier. It can make our bodies healthier. It can make the environment more sustainable. And that's really the promise there.